Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has joined with more than 50 faith groups, charities and politicians to call on the government to take urgent action to bring the cost of living gap faced by the lowest income families in. It follows publication of a report commissioned by Mr Brown, which reveals the gap between the support the government is currently offering to households and the anticipated rise in living costs. Liverpool Metro Mayor Steve Rotherham has added his name to the call for action, as also has Reverend Canon Ellen Loudon, chair of the charity Together Liverpool. And we can talk to Canon Ellen this moment right here on Daybreak. Good morning, first of all, Reverend Ellen.
Morning, Helen. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you for giving us your time to talk about this subject. Let's start by asking then, why have you added your support to the report?
Well, the report is really quite an extraordinary revelation. Well, revelation. It gives us a lot of data about what we're facing at the moment and what we're going to be walking into over the autumn and winter. And it felt like it was just a very important moment in time, having had 3 budgets this year, to be able to be saying we need urgent action. We need an emergency response to what we're facing and the cost of living rise at this particular moment in time.
And given that it contains a lot of well-known names from the world of politics, as well as many men and women such as yourself from faith groups around the country, how hopeful are you, Reverend Ellen, that it'll be effective?
Well, you've always got to have hope with these things, haven't you? But it's what we're seeing at the moment is that as the Conservative Party is vying for its new leadership, I have not seen any discussion about austerity other than very negative language around urban deprived areas, and no sense of priority around the cost of living at all. Than that the hopefulness is that people will sit and listen and have conversations in Parliament and in government as they go forward and after the recess, and that's what we're calling for, is this emergency budget to actually make positive changes that pulls us out of what we're potentially facing into the autumn and winter.
And what action are you hoping the government will take in response to your request?
Well, if there's an emergency budget, in the same way as we saw the emergency response to the COVID pandemic, what we're hoping is that they will take this situation as seriously as they did the COVID pandemic, and that they will put in place certain provisions that will enable people to not be in fuel and in food poverty over the autumn and winter.
And churches...
An emergency response.
Sorry, carry on.
No, a response to what we would consider to be an emergency situation, an urgent situation.
And maybe you could add a little bit more, Ellen, on that, of what that urgent situation is, because churches and faith groups are pretty much at the front, when it's all happening, and on the front line when it comes to helping people to fight against poverty and the rising cost of living, aren't they?
Yeah, so obviously it's not just faith groups and it's not just churches. The voluntary sector in the city region is extraordinary, and the community groups that have come together during the COVID pandemic did an amazing work to respond to the emergency at that point. And collectively, we worked to be able to restore and bring hope and food and medicines and provisions to not just the most vulnerable in poverty terms, but also the most vulnerable in social and cultural terms. And that's what we've seen with the work in our community and faith groups, is that this being enabling people to actually mobilise the action that is able to bring out and draw out communities in the best way possible. And that's what Together Liverpool does, and that's what many other organisations, not just in Liverpool, the city, but across the city region. What we've been finding is that those groups are not just now just responding to the emergency, but also wanting to go upstream and ask the question, why is this happening? Why are we constantly having to respond to emergencies on the front end, on the street, in our churches and communities, why aren't people further upstream saying, what is going on here? Why does this keep happening? What can we do to stop this strategically? And from a point of view of government and region and borough, we know that we're working as hard as we can, but we need our government to take action. It can't just be left to the frontline groups.
And Ellen, just in a sentence, because we've got to move on to our next guest, what would you like to see happen? What's the first call to action the government should do?
Well, the first call to action, which is what Gordon Brown is asking for, and Donald Hirsch in this report, is an emergency budget set by the government that responds to the cost of living rise and enables people, real people, in real life situations, to be able to afford their fuel, to afford their food, and be able to live just normal lives that you would expect anybody to be able to do, their wage, to be able to pay for the goods that we need in order to get through the autumn and winter that's heading towards us. So an emergency budget that responds to the cost of living.